Our speaker is an author, national lecturer, freelance writer, and most importantly, an activist for border immigration law enforcement. He received a bachelor's degree in mass communication from Towson University in Maryland in 1976 and has worked as a writer for 30 years. He began his career as an assistant news producer and writer for the NBC TV affiliate in Baltimore. Later, he worked as a business reporter and assistant managing editor for the Aviation Daily in Washington, D.C. He wrote hundreds of news stories on businesses, marketing, and government, and traveled to many corners of the world. His talents and experience led to a career as a corporate communications manager, writer, and editor for the United Airlines and TRW Space and Electronics. He was also a media relations manager and national spokesman for United. In addition, Dan served as a writer for the presidents of United, Mileage Plus Incorporated, TRW Space and Electronics, and DirecTV. After 9/11, Dan began an intense study of the growing immigration crisis in America and the real agenda behind it. He has dedicated himself to awakening Americans and inspiring them to action. He is the author of the acclaimed book, Fighting Immigration Anarchy, which we have here on the table, American Patriots Battle to Save the Nation. Rave reviews have appeared in esteemed magazines such as The New American and The American Conservative. His book praises those citizens who are battling the push for mass immigration and open borders, and exposes masterfully the scheme to merge the U.S. with Mexico and Canada. Dan has been a guest on numerous radio talk shows across the country and regularly speaks to political, civic, and business organizations in the western U.S. He has spoken at prestigious venues such as the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and the Nixon Library in Southern California, and the Lord Wakefield in Wakefield, Massachusetts, as of today. Prestigious. Dan has received awards for pro-American activities from local groups such as the Southern California Republican Women and Men and national organizations such as Eagle Forum. We are delighted to welcome Dan tonight as part of his week-long tour in the Northeast United States for local chapters of the John Birch Society. Let's give a warm welcome. John, is the projector on?
It's coming.
Good evening. I hope everybody can hear me. I want to tell you it's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you, and I thank the John Birch Society for giving me this opportunity to tell you the truth about what's really going on, and it's been wonderful. I live in Los Angeles, which I call the capital of Mexifornia, and it's wonderful to be here in the Northeast because I feel like I'm back in America again. Yesterday in a suburb of Albany, one of the JBS members was driving me around, and we went down one side street, and I saw one house after another with the American flag out front. And normally I see one house after another with a Mexican flag out front. So, anyway, I have a lot to share with you. I created a special 60-slide presentation specifically for this tour, and I actually completed it just a couple of days ago. And last night I talked a little bit too long, so I'm going to get right into it now. I'm going to show you some, the first few slides will be mostly words, but then most of the rest of the presentation will be pictures and documents, and I think you're going to be shocked, stunned by what you see, and then hopefully inspired at the end of the talk. My talk is the immigration invasion and hidden agenda behind open borders. You know, and you may be wondering, I should ask one question before I get started here. How many of you are not members of the JBS? Okay, not too many. Most of you are. You may be wondering, you know, why is the Bush administration and many members of Congress and most of the presidential candidates pushing so hard for a massive guest worker amnesty program, which they call comprehensive immigration reform? You know, why are thousands of foreigners allowed to illegally cross our border every day and remain in our country? Why won't the federal government build the more than 700 miles of double-layered fencing that Congress approved and the President signed into law last October?
Why are thousands of illegal aliens allowed to march in streets across America, waving Mexican flags and other flags and making all kinds of demands? Why were Border Patrol agents Ramos and Campion sent to prison earlier this year for 12 years, while the illegal alien drug smuggler was given full immunity to testify against them? And why is the Bush administration pushing so hard to allow 100 Mexican trucking companies, not 100 trucks, but 100 Mexican trucking companies, full access to U.S. highways? Why has the administration repeatedly told us since 9/11, which was 6 years and a month ago, that we're in a war on terror? I mean, you hear that every hour, don't you? Practically by the news media. Yet they've allowed literally millions of people to illegally invade our country since 9/11 and remain here. Why does the federal government allow sanctuary policies protecting illegal aliens, including violent criminals, in cities across the United States, even though those policies are against federal law? To really understand what's going on, we're going to go back to 1965, okay? And I'm going to take you down a path of 40 years or so, and I'm going to connect the dots for you. We're going to start in 1965, and that is when Congress amended the Immigration and Nationality Act and opened the door to mass immigration. Can everybody see this clearly? Great. Quotas based on national origin were eliminated, and family unification or chain migration, I'm sure you've all heard of that, was introduced. This bill discriminated against low fertility nations in favor of the more overpopulated, high fertility third world countries. Helping to push this bill through the Congress was Senator Ted Kennedy, and he wanted to reassure his colleagues and the American people, and he said, quote, "The bill will not flood our cities with immigrants. It will not relax the standards of admission. It will not upset the ethnic mix of our society, and it will not cause American workers to lose their jobs." Well, was this just simply congressional ignorance? Or is Congress lying to cover a scheme designed to dismantle the American middle class, lower our wages, and divide our national culture? Well, I think I'm going to answer these questions for you tonight. And the next couple of slides I'm going to show you, there are a lot of words on them, but I think they're very important. Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, wrote in the JBS Bulletin in 1968, quote, "Another integral part of the Insiders program has been the promotion of crime and the coddling of criminals. This is the very essence of the central purpose to destroy civilization in general and the American forefront of that civilization in particular. Among the purposes of this total campaign is adding to the atmosphere of revolution all around us and to a feeling of fear, frustration, despair, and resignation among the American people." Boy, don't we feel like that sometimes? To help in this conversion of the American scene, he went on, into a holocaust by crime and treason, the Insiders needed more criminals and more communists than they could produce fast enough out of native-born Americans. An early part of the plan, therefore, was to bring in these needed reinforcements in two ways. A, by breaking down our immigration laws through changes, circumvention, and loopholes, and B, by a continuous stream of entries without any pretense of legality, unquote. Really quite remarkable that he wrote that 40 years ago. That same year, 1968, the Ford Foundation, leftist, wealthy, tax-exempt foundation, founded two organizations that have had a dramatically negative impact on our country since that time. One was the National Council of La Raza. La Raza means the race, you probably know that. And the other was the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, or MALDEF. And these two organizations were created to create a Hispanic nation within our country using both legal immigrants and illegal aliens. The first president of the National Council of La Raza was Maclavio Barraza, an identified member of the Communist Party. So in 1968, this is when that 1965 change to our immigration policy actually took effect, and so began massive legal and illegal immigration from third world countries. A number of years later, June 14th, 1984, President Reagan sounded a dire warning, He said, quote, "The simple truth is that we've lost control of our own borders, and no nation can do that and survive." A couple of years later, instead of deporting the illegal aliens and upholding the U.S. Constitution, which states in Article 4, Section 4, that the United States shall protect each state from invasion, Congress and Reagan rewarded about 3 million illegal aliens, mostly Mexicans, with amnesty and a path to citizenship. The bill included employer sanctions to discourage more illegal immigration. The amnesty was sold as a never-to-be-repeated action. I'm sure you all know about that. Well, that same year, again, Senator Ted Kennedy said, quote, "We will secure the borders henceforth. We will never again bring forward another amnesty bill like this," unquote. 4 years later, Congress and the first President Bush passed another Immigration Act. This one increased legal immigration by several 100,000 people per year. Now, the first President Bush, as you know, was in the White House from 1988 to 1992. And in numerous venues, as the John Birch Society has documented in its many publications, President Bush stated his goal for a New World Order. And I remember that. It was either 1990 or 1991. He was addressing a joint session of Congress. And I was watching television that night. And he said New World Order, and that was the first time I had heard that term. I was rather naive and ignorant, and I was hoping, okay, now he's going to define New World Order, but he didn't do that. And so the phrase New World Order, as you probably know, has been used for generations by individuals seeking to control the world through socialism step by step in a deceptive and gradual process. Well, the first President Bush introduced the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA. He and others told us that NAFTA would stimulate commerce, spur job creation, and curb illegal immigration. In 1993, President Clinton signed NAFTA with support from Republican and Democratic leaders, and I've put the words Republican and Democratic in quotes because, well, really to me, these terms are rather meaningless, as are the terms conservative and liberal, because they mean different things to different people at different times, and frankly, as I will prove throughout the presentation tonight, as we started in 1965 when Lyndon Johnson was president, whether the president calls himself a Democrat or Republican, the policies never change. Well, NAFTA, of course, as I said, was signed in 1993. This joined the United States with the socialist governments of Canada and Mexico in a developing economic and political union. NAFTA was the first major trade pact signed by the United States to bring significant immigration consequences. It set a precedent that moved our country down the path of equating so-called free trade with not only the free flow of goods across our borders, but also people. In 1994, my state, California, we passed overwhelmingly by a 60% to 40% margin Proposition 187. How many of you have heard of Prop 187?
I think I have. Yeah.
Okay, quite a few hands. This historic measure would have denied most social services to illegal aliens and eliminated a magnet for people to enter California illegally. This was dramatic. It was going to be a great turning point, we thought. I write about Prop 187 in several chapters of my book, most extensively in my chapter called Barbara Coe. Barbara Coe was a police manager in Anaheim, and she was in the mid-1980s. She was, and I write about her extensively in my book, she was raised on a Sioux Indian reservation. And so she had this job as a manager at the Anaheim Police Department in the mid-1980s, and she was told, tell us, find out where all this crime is coming from. All of a sudden, there's so much crime in Orange County. Well, she was a bright lady, and she determined that it was coming mostly from illegal aliens. And so she told her superiors, and her superiors said, no, we don't want you to talk about that. Just go back and do your job. And she said, well, I am doing my job. That's what you told me to do. Well, she was fired from her job a couple of years later for persisting on trying to explain and expose the truth here. And in the early 1990s, she founded the California Coalition for Immigration Reform, which has been one of the leading organizations in the country. And she said in 1992, when she founded her organization, "Until the U.S. controls immigration, all else is a moot point, as it will no longer matter," unquote. Very powerful words. Well, in 1997, Mexican President Zedillo declared at a meeting of the National Council of La Raza, remember the organization we talked about, founded by the Ford Foundation in 1968, he declared at a meeting of La Raza in Chicago, quote, "I have proudly affirmed that the Mexican nation extends beyond the territory enclosed by its borders, and that Mexican migrants are a very important part of it," unquote. Now this was in a U.S. city. Just last month, you may know that Mexican President Calderon addressed a joint session of Congress in Mexico, and he said that Mexico doesn't end at its border. What do you know about that? A couple of years later, in 1999, California Governor Gray Davis killed Proposition 187 that we had passed overwhelmingly by 60 to 40% margin in 1994 in a backroom deal with Mexican President Zedillo, the California Latino Caucus, and MALDAF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Organization founded by the Ford Foundation. That same year, when Gray Davis killed Prop 187, which of course was illegal, he was speaking to a Hispanic audience in California, and he said, quote, "In the near future, people will look upon California and Mexico as one magnificent region." Well, I thought they were two separate countries. Well, in 2003, Californians began an effort to recall Governor Gray Davis. It was very exciting, by the way, and I write about it in my book. And in October of that year, 2003, Governor Gray Davis was recalled from office just 2 months after he signed a bill granting driver's licenses to illegal aliens. And I bring that up, and I, of course, mentioned at the audience I spoke to last night in Albany because, you can make things happen. You can make things happen. So maybe Elliot Spitzer needs to be recalled from office. In January of 2004, you may recall, that's when President Bush, this was on C-SPAN, I remember watching it, I was in the midst of writing my book, Fighting Immigration Anarchy. President Bush announced his so-called guest worker program at the White House, which, of course, was an amnesty program, which he didn't call it an amnesty program. And who did he invite to the White House for this announcement? Well, the National Council of La Raza and the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And somehow Colorado Congressman Tom Tancredo didn't get an invitation. In December of 2004, T.J. Bonner, head of the National Border Patrol Council, the union for the Border Patrol agents, he was speaking at an immigration conference just outside Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And I let off one of my chapters, my book, with this quote. Mr. Bonner said, "Today as we sit here, and every other day, 10,000 illegal aliens will cross our border. The United States Border Patrol will catch about 3,000 of those people. We are in the midst of an unprecedented crisis," unquote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today and this evening, okay? 10,000. And only 3,000 will be apprehended. And perhaps even fewer now that our federal government sent Ramos and Campion to prison for 12 years, because it sends a signal to the other Border Patrol agents, if you do your jobs, this could happen to you. Now we're going to get into the pictures. Here is a night vision photo showing dozens of illegal aliens invading the United States near the Arizona-Mexico border in 2005. Can you see this line here? Yeah. Okay. This is a photo courtesy of D.A. King's The American Resistance. Maybe you've heard of D.A. King, great American patriot in Georgia who's become a national figure in the fight against the invasion. That's really remarkable, but yet Katie Couric and Brian Williams on CBS and NBC haven't shown us these pictures on the evening news, have they? We haven't seen it in the front page of our daily local newspapers. Well, now here's another picture that was taken just on June 1st of this year. You'll see 13 illegal aliens fleeing from a Border Patrol agent on a ranch in Arizona. Citizen activist Glenn Spencer's American Border Patrol UAV on an unmanned aerial vehicle helped flush the illegal aliens out from the hiding place. Glenn Spencer's really a tremendous American patriot. He's been down on the border there documenting the invasion. In fact, you can go to his website, AmericanPatrol.com, and he has it. Has the invasion online live, so you can actually see it, which of course is what our mainstream news media should be doing, but they don't do that. In January of 2005, you may have read or heard that the Wall Street investment firm Bear Stearns reported that 20 million illegal aliens, it was a report that they had compiled, reported that 20 million illegal aliens live in the United States, holding 12 to 15 million jobs, as employers have replaced American workers with lower wage illegal labor subsidized by all of us in this room. And understand that this labor is not cheap. Now, it's cheap to the corporate executives and the others who are profiting from this, but it is not cheap to us because we are subsidizing it. Health care, education, incarceration, food stamps. In October of 2006, just last year, the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security issued a report. It's about a 40-page report. And I downloaded it as soon as it was released that day in October of last year, and even I was stunned by what this report said. It said, and here it is, it's called A Line in the Sand, Confronting the Threat at the Southwest Border. Quote, in the year 2005, as many as 4 million to 10 million illegal aliens crossed into the United States. Did you hear that? 4 million to 10 million in the year 2005. How many of you read that in your newspaper? How many of you saw this reported on your TV newscasts? Isn't that remarkable? Now, I did some research, and the Houston Chronicle, which occasionally does report the truth, when this was released, on the day it was released, there was a story that appeared in the Houston Chronicle, and they actually included that quote. However, I found that virtually no other media organizations, print or broadcast or cable, reported this news. I did write an article 3 days later that was published on the internet. This report also said that the Border Patrol caught just 1.2 million illegal aliens that year, including 650 from special interest countries, which means countries that sponsor terrorism. Now, if you figure it out here, if 4 to 10 million made it in, or crossed into the United States, the Border Patrol only caught 1.2, including 650 from special interest countries. That means actually thousands of people crossed in the United States that year from special interest countries. The report also says that, quote, members of Hezbollah have already entered the United States across the southwest border. Now, we frequently hear from the mainstream media, which is, there's nothing mainstream about it, it's a corporate cartel. We hear from them about Hezbollah in the Middle East, don't we? Frequently. Did they tell you about this? No, they did not. This report, of course, not surprisingly, said that up to 80 million pounds of cocaine and marijuana came into our country just that year. The report also includes a number of shocking photos. I found them shocking, and I'm going to share one with you. You might be thinking, gee, they're coming in by the trainloads. Well, they are. They are coming in by the trainloads. This photo is in the report. Scores of people riding railroad cars from Central America and Mexico en route to the U.S. border. Actually, that is the exact caption that appears in the report. There you go. Coming in by the trainloads. Now, these people, not all of them are coming here to steal jobs from Americans. Americans of, all different skin colors. We come in different skin colors, races, ethnicities, and religions. Law enforcement tells us that at least 10% that come here illegally are murderers, rapists, pedophiles, thieves, drug smugglers, and vicious gang members. Now, going back to the previous slide and to T.J. Bonner's quote about 10,000 coming across every day, if 3,000 are apprehended, 7,000 make it in, that means every day approximately 700 come into our country, are already known criminals, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, so forth and so on, which is why we are seeing this rise in crime across our country, especially these gang crimes. No, it's no surprise. We know where this is coming from. And of course, there's no Ellis Island down there on the border, is there? So many illegal aliens and many legal immigrants as well have diseases such as tuberculosis. And even the liberal Seattle Times reported that TB cases have doubled in King County, Washington, in the past year because of foreign-born residents. Now, if the Seattle Times is willing to admit that, it's probably worse.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a few statistics from California and across the country, just about all of which are in my book. In 2004, Los Angeles County Sheriff, where I live, Los Angeles County Sheriff Lee Baca said that there are 100,000 gang members in Los Angeles County alone. Okay? Now, this was reported in the LA Times and the LA Daily News, and this was reported in 2004. And I figure if Sheriff Baca is going to admit that there are 100,000, it's probably 150,000 or maybe more. And I know that most of them are illegal aliens. Now, folks, 150,000 gang members in one county is equal to the size of our military in Iraq. There are about 9,000 LA police officers. When the next riots hit, it's going to be very ugly. Most warrants for murder in Los Angeles and in many other cities across our country are for illegal aliens. About 30% of all prison inmates in California and across the United States are illegal aliens. Congressman Steve King of Iowa last year reported that he estimated that 12 Americans are murdered by illegal aliens every day in our country, and another 13 are killed by drunk illegal alien drivers. In January of this year, the U.S. Justice Department reported that in 2004, illegal aliens who were arrested for crimes were rearrested as many as 6 times. Now here's one of the figures that I share with all of my audiences because I still find it just shocking and frightening for the future of our country. More than 53%, and this was reported a couple of years ago, more than 53% of the people in Los Angeles County over the age of 16 can barely read, write, or speak English. What kind of a country are we going to have in the years ahead if this continues, this invasion? More than 160 schools are being built in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, not the county, but the city of Los Angeles, at a cost of more than $15 billion to taxpayers. And the majority of the kids, which I will show you some pictures of, are illegal aliens and the children of illegal aliens, and they don't graduate. Hospitals and emergency rooms, as you probably know, maybe it's been happening here in your state, have been going bankrupt for years and closing because of this massive influx. Hundreds of thousands of babies are born to illegal alien mothers every year in America. These babies are granted instant U.S. citizenship and welfare benefits, and of course, you know, this is a misinterpretation, a gross misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution ratified in 1868, and it wasn't so that people could come across the border, sneak across the border illegally, and have babies. And of course, back then we didn't have a welfare state and all of that, but it was for black Americans. We're told by Hillary Clinton and others running for president that 47 million people don't have health insurance in America, so we must provide universal health care. Well, what Hillary and others don't tell us is that up to half of those 47 million are illegal aliens. Now we're going to look at the Reconquista. which means reconquering. Reconquista, the Takeover of America. This is a pamphlet that was published by the California Coalition for Immigration Reform. Remember, I told you about that, and Barbara Coe heads it up. And this report includes recorded statements by those who, in their own words, have vowed to control the government and your lives by the vote if possible. Now there are, you really should check out, if you can, ccir.net on the internet, and you can actually hear in their, out of their own mouths, many of these Reconquistas, who include university professors, who are still university professors, and elected officials in our country. And when I first heard these frightening speeches and excerpts, I felt as though I was listening to Adolf Hitler. I'll share just one with you from Henry Cisneros, who was the Secretary of Housing under President Clinton and former president of Univision. Univision, which is headquartered not too far from my home in Los Angeles, is the Spanish language TV network, or one of them. And Henry Cisneros, a U.S. cabinet member, said, quote, "As goes the Latino population, will go California. And as goes California, will go the United States of America." He said these words in the 1990s. He said, "We should stand for the proud Latino future. We must stand for the people, now more than ever, and then be prepared to fight." On March 27th of 2006, students at a Southern California high school, not far from my home, raised the Mexican flag over the American flag flying upside down. Show you some future high school students in Los Angeles. May 27th, 2006, this was a front page Los Angeles Times story and photo showing LA Mayor Villaraigosa and local elementary school kids waving Mexican flags at Los Angeles Airport where they welcome Mexican President Fox. These will be the future high school students who will take down the American flag at their high schools and raise the Mexican flag with the U.S. flag underneath it, you see. On August 26th of 2006, a mob took down an American flag at the Maywood Post Office, again not far from my home, in Southern California. They stomped on it and replaced it with a Mexican flag as police looked on. Here are the police. This is at a U.S. post office, ladies and gentlemen. Maywood has declared itself a sanctuary city, as have many cities across America. And I would like to share with you a personal anecdote I had about when I went to Maywood last year for a pro-American rally, but I'm afraid we won't have time. If we do have time, I'm going to come back to it because it's a frightening story. On September 2nd, 2006, illegal aliens and anarchists staged a counter-protest in front of the City Hall in National City, California, against the Minutemen and in support of the city's sanctuary policy. National City is a suburb of San Diego. It's near the, border with Mexico. See police up here, police here. Signs, about the Minutemen. There were some other signs that are not in this picture. I took this picture telling us to go back to Europe, and I was asking myself, well, I didn't come from Europe. I was born in America. I've been to Europe many times on business and vacation, but I didn't come from Europe. And on the other side of the street, there are more police, and there are American patriots. And I'm going to show you a slide of the American patriots at this particular rally later on in the presentation. Isn't it? Can you believe we're talking about this?
It's hard to believe.
Can you believe this? On March 25th of this year, and I saw this with my own eyes, I was marching down Broadway to LA City Hall. Mexicans burned the American flag and displayed the Mexican flags, you can see the Mexican flags, as Americans marched through downtown LA for border and immigration law enforcement. The march was led by Ted Hayes, who you may have heard about, a black man, very charismatic fellow. And this was in support of black Americans who are losing their jobs and losing their lives to illegal aliens. They're being eliminated. Black Americans are. There are many murders by illegal aliens of black Americans in this country, by the way. And this was one of the most dramatic events that I had ever participated in, and very briefly, there were about 150 of us American patriots of different skin colors. We had a permit to march down Broadway to LA City Hall, where I spoke on the steps of City Hall, and it was about a mile march. We had our American flags and various signs, and lining the sidewalks were literally thousands of Hispanics. I assume most of them are illegal aliens. And I will tell you, and I'm not exaggerating, they would have killed us if we didn't have police protection. There were about 150 riot police who were protecting us as we were marching down Broadway. And what particularly struck me was many of the teenage Latinas seemed to be the most angry and most vicious, saying F you to us, giving us the fingers as we marched down our own street in America. So you can see how thankful they are for their free medical care and all the rest of it. Now, this picture is courtesy of Save Our State in California. Just a couple of weeks ago, September 13th, Mexico's National Action Party, which is a political party, held a conference at Plaza Mexico in Los Angeles to organize opposition to U.S. immigration law and to register illegal alien voters. And I've got arrows pointing to two Mexican federales guarding the event site, okay? These are Mexican troops on U.S. soil protecting a Mexican political party meeting in our country. How many of you heard about this on the evening news?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully, to some American patriots, they took these pictures and many more, and they were there. This is kind of frightening, isn't it?
It is.
It's shocking.
It is.
I put together a montage. I came up with this idea about a week ago. You remember the picture I showed of the illegals,
Yep.
the night vision photo? Taking down the flag at the high school, putting up the Mexican flag, and I added a photo to this montage. This is a picture in the LA Times earlier this year. A woman, a traveler, being x-rayed at the Phoenix airport. And the point of this montage is Homeland Security is a fraud. The war on terror is a fraud. We were being lied to regularly. And of course, I flew here from LA a couple of days ago, and I had to bite my tongue, bite my tongue, because I didn't particularly enjoy taking off my shoes and taking off my belt, emptying my pocket, showing my ID several times, to board an airplane in my own country as this was going on when I was boarding the airplane. And we have something called the U.S. Department of Defense, don't we? What are they defending?
Exactly. New World Order.
We'll get to that. Well, as this is going on, a police state is emerging in our country. Is it not?
It is.
John Birch Society has done an excellent job of reporting this. Since 9/11, the government media have told us that we're in a war on terror. They've passed the Patriot Act and created Homeland Security. At our airports, as I just pointed out, there are armed guards, invasive searches, ID checks, and our property is seized. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I was a victim of the emerging police state in our country as I was writing my book. In July of 2004, and I got to watch my time here because I could talk about this for hours. In July of 2004, when I was researching and writing my book, I was interrogated by the FBI and Secret Service over a period of 5 days.
Wow.
And I wrote about this in my book, my epilogue called My Vacation with the FBI. It's easy to laugh now, but I wasn't laughing back then. I was scared to death.
Sure.
And I had been accused essentially of being a terrorist, and you can see I'm very frightening. I'm very frightening. All 5'6" of me. And I was accused of writing and sending letters to the Binghamton, New York FBI office, where I was born in Binghamton, in July of 2004. And these letters, and they eventually showed the letters to me, the letters that were typed and not well written, warning about weapons of mass destruction planted near the Democratic National Convention site in Boston that year. They accused me of writing the letters, and I was interrogated over a period of several days by more than a dozen FBI agents. And at one point, and I was visiting my dad in Frederick, Maryland, my 89-year-old dad, and one of the days when the FBI came to my dad's home, my dad and brother's home, the FBI agents wanted to take me to their office. They wanted to show me some things, and the things happened to be these letters that they accused me of writing, which I didn't write. No. And my father said, "Am I going to see my son again?" And I was thinking the same thing, and with the Patriot Act and all the executive orders, I thought, well, I'm going to be shipped off to one of these prisons and tortured. But I said a quick silent prayer to God, and I'm still here, and I'm here to tell this story. Well, after the interrogations, and they came to my brother and dad's house without a warrant and took the 3 computers that my brother owned out of the house. They went through the house with me following them, even though they didn't have a search warrant, and they were looking for anything and everything. It was over, and I flew back to Los Angeles, and I was quite upset. They came and they interrogated I shouldn't say interrogated, they questioned my wife at our home in LA when they were questioning me. In fact, they questioned people in 7 states regards to me. Wow. That week, at least. And 2 weeks later, my wife and I are cooking dinner at our home one Saturday night, and I received a phone call from a reporter from the Binghamton newspaper. And he said he had heard about me being questioned about these weapons of mass destruction. And of course, I wondered, how could he possibly know? Yeah. Well, obviously the FBI must have told him, and here are those stories. They ran several stories about your speaker tonight. 3 of them were front page stories in the Binghamton paper. And they used my name, where I lived. They called me a radical. They said I had radical ideas about everything, especially immigration. Wow. My ideas about immigration, which my ideas are law enforcement, are radical. And I was very concerned about this. The first day the first story appeared, it was a Sunday. I thought, oh my gosh, because I had done PR for United Airlines and other companies, and I know how the media works. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to become a national story. My life will be destroyed. My wife's life will be destroyed. So I called a lawyer who's become a friend of mine. She's with Judicial Watch, a patriot, and she came to my rescue, and we wrote a statement that I shared with the media in Binghamton and other parts of upstate New York, and they eventually left me alone. And my wife said, Dan, don't finish work on your book. Let Tom Tancredo and other people fix this crisis. And I put the stuff in the closet, and thanks to my dad and my lawyer and Barbara Coe and my own brain, thinking about this, I thought, I've learned too much and I need to share this with the American people. So I resumed work on the book, and I finished it in 2005. But there's an emerging police state emerging in our country as we are being invaded by foreigners. So you and millions of other Americans are asking, well, what is going on? And of course, since you guys, most of you are members of the JBS, you already know, but I'm going to show you some documents and reports that I think will bring this issue into better focus. So I'm going to take us down another path in the year 2005, which I write about in my book and discuss on radio shows that allow me to speak the truth. March 23 of 2005, our president held a meeting in Waco, Texas at Baylor University, and that morning with President Fox of Mexico and Prime Minister Martin of Canada, they established the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America, which we will call SPP because it's too long to say. And behind closed doors, our president that morning agreed to erase 230 years of American independence. Well, they came out of the meeting and had a news conference there, and the reporters didn't ask the questions I would have asked, but it was that day that President Bush at the news conference called the Minutemen vigilantes. just a few hours after he had erased our country, essentially. And the Minutemen hadn't even begun their patrols yet. It wasn't going to begin for another week. And how do I know that they are erasing our country, or they agreed to on that day? The Council on Foreign Relations 2 months later, in May, and here's the report if you want to take a look at it. Council on Foreign Relations published Building a North American Community. The report says Bush, Fox, and Martin, quote, committed their governments, unquote, to merging the United States, Mexico, and Canada and allowing for the free movement of people when they established the Security and Prosperity Partnership 2 months earlier. I have an arrow pointing to Robert A. Pastor, a professor at American University in Washington, D.C., and we'll talk about Mr. Pastor a little bit later. He was one of the authors of this report. In fact, he is the architect of the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America. The CFR report, Building a North American Community, calls for the establishment by the year 2010, ladies and gentlemen, of a North American community to enhance security and prosperity. We're going to be more prosperous and secure by merging with Mexico. And the community's boundaries will be defined by a common external tariff and an outer security perimeter. Well, the translation is a common external tariff means common taxing for the three countries, and an outer security perimeter means no more U.S. borders by the year 2010, which is in less than 3 years. And they agreed at the first SPP meeting that they would have working groups who would kind of like fill in the details of this merger. And I later found out that Michael Chertoff, head of Homeland Security, Carlos Gutierrez, head of the Commerce Department, and Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State, that great pianist, Condoleezza Rice, were assigned to head up the U.S. groups. And all three of these people were appointed to their cabinet post just 3 months before the Waco meeting, which was a little tidbit that I just found rather interesting. Something else I found interesting was that when Bill Clinton became president and fired all U.S. attorneys in 1993, there was one who was not fired, and that was Michael Chertoff. He was the U.S. attorney in New Jersey. Isn't that interesting? I wonder what's going on there. David Rockefeller, our buddy, the JBS is, of course, written extensively about Mr. Rockefeller. This is his book, Memoirs, published in 2002. He is chairman emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations. He also is the founder and honorary chairman of the Trilateral Commission and a member of the Bilderberg Steering Committee. And interestingly, actually thankfully, we should send him a Christmas card. He kind of tipped his hand and actually revealed to us in his book the following on page 405. For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal, working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. Well, if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. Well, you are guilty, Mr. Rockefeller, of treason.
That's right.
I don't care how much money you have.
That's right.
Well, you know, this SPP, of course, is setting the stage for uniting the U.S., Mexico, and Canada into a single economic and political system, a North American Union modeled after the European Union. In 2000, the year 2000 in London, former Soviet dictator Mikhail Gorbachev, who is, of course, still a communist, it's not like he said, oh, I'm no longer a communist, he described the European Union as, quote, the new European Soviet, unquote. So I think we should be asking ourselves, does that mean that the North American Union that is merging is going to be the new American Soviet? Yeah. Well, among other radical actions, the Council on Foreign Relations report, which we talked about a minute ago, said that the SPP, Security and Prosperity Partnership, would allow millions of illegal Mexican workers to draw billions of dollars from our Social Security Trust Fund. Do you remember a couple of years ago when President Bush, our great commander-in-chief, was crisscrossing the nation and meeting with town hall meetings and telling Americans that he was going to protect our Social Security? This is about 3 years ago, and behind closed doors, he and others in the administration were actually working to give away our Social Security money to the Mexican illegal aliens. Among other radical actions, a U.S. taxpayer fund to finance tens of thousands of Mexican students to study in U.S. colleges will be set up because we are so generous. A permanent tribunal for North American dispute resolution will be established, and that means court decisions from judges outside the United States and unaccountable to Americans will be making these decisions. And, you know, since it was founded in 1921, the New York-based CFR has been working to eliminate national identities and borders and convert America into a socialist state, and then make it into a unit of a one-world socialist system. Going down our path in the year 2005, on June 23rd, I'm sure you all remember this, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that state and local governments could use eminent domain to take private property against the owner's will for use in private development. This ruling will make it possible for the government to take millions of acres of land to build the massive NAFTA superhighway toll road system to connect Mexico, the United States, and Canada, and this will be an important step in the North American Union. This picture appeared first in the New American magazine 1 year ago in that special North American Union issue, and what they didn't include were all the roads would be going horizontal, because if they included all those roads, you wouldn't be able to see anything, because we're talking about dozens of roads. And the way this is going to work, as you probably know already, the southern Mexican ports down here, the container ships from communist China will bring over the products that we used to make in our country, only a lot better. They'll bring over those products, offload them at these ports, and by the way, communist China is helping to build these ports in Mexico. We're being surrounded. The ports, the cargo will be offloaded on trucks and railroad cars, brought up into our country on these many roads. The U.S. Customs, I shouldn't say U.S. Customs, the Customs Office will be located in Kansas City, and it will be managed by the Mexican government. The first plank of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx is the abolition of private property for conversion to the state for the good of the state. That's our conservative U.S. Supreme Court, by the way. They call it the conservative Supreme Court. Several of the other 10 planks are already in place in America, of course, including the Federal Reserve and the income tax established in 1913, and free education for all children in public schools, and apparently that includes illegal aliens. Under this NAFTA superhighway plan, millions of containers from communist China will be brought into our country through Mexican ports, as I mentioned earlier. Mexican dock workers, truck drivers, and train workers will be used to reduce the cost of transporting the containers into our country. Right now, the two largest ports are in Los Angeles and Long Beach. In fact, I can see those ports from where we live on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. So, you know, why pay American workers a living wage when you can offload the products that we used to make in our country, offload them in Mexico? Of course, now you can see why the Bush administration is pushing so hard to allow the 100 Mexican trucking companies travel throughout our country. It all comes together, doesn't it?
Sure.
Well, how do we know that what I'm telling you is the truth? Well, there have been various conferences about this trade corridor. This was May of 2004, Kansas City, the North American International Trade Corridor Partnership. And you can't read these words here. And oh, by the way, there's an arrow pointing to our friend Robert Pastor, the American University professor. He's everywhere. And some of the words in these documents include North American convergence, emerging North American economic system, and social integration of our communities. That sounds like a merger to me, doesn't it? Here's a more recent meeting, the Great Plains International Trade Corridor Conference held in September in Denver. officials from the United States, Mexico, and Canada discussed a multimodal transportation corridor that will move goods and services through the Great Plains from Mexico to Canada. And of course, these NAFTA superhighways will ruin our economy, allow more terrorist criminals and drugs to enter our country. Well, here is Mr. Robert Pastor, chief architect of the SPP, CFR member, and a David Rockefeller protege. Here's an opinion piece I cut out of the LA Times, which I read every day to know what the socialists and communists are up to, published in the LA Times on November 30th, and he writes, "Build bridges, not fences." Now, this is an opinion piece, but I have never seen in the LA Times any story about the NAFTA superhighway and the merger. There he is. We'll show you some more traders, or at least I'll give you their names. As the JBS has pointed out in its publications, Mr. Pastor has been involved in Marxist activities in Latin America for many years and was instrumental in the giveaway of the Panama Canal under the Carter administration. Continuing down our path, in the year 2005, in June 30th of that year, the U.S. Senate passed the Central American Free Trade Agreement, also known as CAFTA. The next month, July 28th, the U.S. House of Representatives, they defeated CAFTA that day. They defeated CAFTA, but oh, wait a minute. The House leadership, they didn't like the results. So they kind of twisted the rules. George Bush and Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice, Cheney and Rice are members of the CFR, and a few other members of the administration drove down Pennsylvania Avenue to Capitol Hill that day to twist Republican arms to get the vote they wanted.
Oh, boy.
This sounds like a communist country, doesn't it? Isn't this what they do in other countries? And after midnight that night, as I wrote in my book, CAFTA passed in the House by 2 votes, including my Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, who was supposed to be a conservative, but apparently isn't. He voted for CAFTA too. And a couple of months later, American corporations began outsourcing production in our country to Central America. But most of these presidential candidates, they say free trade. Free trade's great. It's great. Well, Karl Marx must be smiling. Speaking in 1848 to the Democratic Association of Brussels, Marx said, quote, "In a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution. It is in this revolutionary sense alone, gentlemen, that I vote in favor of free trade," unquote. In his Communist Manifesto, Marx wrote, quote, "The communists are criticized for desiring to abolish countries and nationalities," unquote. 1848, and remember that this is the Council on Foreign Relations goal, to eliminate national identities and borders and convert America into a socialist state and then make it a unit in a one world socialist system. For decades, CFR members have dominated the administrations of our presidents, whether they call themselves Republicans or Democrats. Corporate globalism, ladies and gentlemen, is the New World Order. The destruction of the sovereign state and the creation of a world socialist government run by the super-rich and their business cartels. Free trade agreements and the massive third world invasion into our country are the primary schemes used to erase our borders, middle class, American way of life, independence, and U.S. Constitution. Here is the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America report, year 2006, to leaders. I'm one of the few people who has this report. I'm sure the FBI will be coming after me. It's 1 inch thick. I have the 2005 report. Actually, it was pretty easy. I just contacted the Commerce Department and they sent them to me. And this report is a progress report on the merger. Aren't you happy? In the areas of transportation, energy, the environment, food and agriculture, health, law enforcement, facilitating the movement of people and goods, and other areas of our daily lives. Yet, I really think Britney Spears and Paris Hilton are a lot more important. Here's the table of contents just to show you that what I'm telling you is the truth. Health, environment, food and agriculture, energy, transportation, financial services, but we're going to be more secure and more prosperous and secure. I'm really excited about that. Well, who signed this report? Excuse me, we've got to go back. Okay. The signature initiative in this report here is safer, faster, and more efficient border crossings. Now you know why they're not building the fence. They never intended to build a fence. No. And it was a month before the election last November. Great timing.
Yeah.
But here you can see each page looks like this. It's in English, French, and Spanish. Initiative, key milestones, and status. And you can see over here they've completed quite a few of their initiatives. So getting back to what I was saying earlier, who signed this? Michael Chertoff, Secretary of Homeland Security. He's securing our homeland by merging us with Mexico and Canada. Carlos Gutierrez, Secretary of Commerce, and Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State. And by the way, Gutierrez and Rice just last week were down in Latin America trying to forge more so-called free trade agreements. Isn't that, head of Homeland Security? Of course, we shouldn't have this Michael Homeland Chertoff, Security Department to begin with. A picture published in the LA Times, February 28th of this year, shown welding a chunk of fence going up on the Arizona-Mexico border.
Boy, that's impressive.
Let's go back here, okay. Merger, welding the fence.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey,
Is that a well torch or a blow torch?
Cutting torch.
Now, here's a picture in the LA Times covering the 2006 SPP summit in Cancun with stirring photos about Bush visiting Mexican ruins. This was on the front page. This was the inside story, page A19. And here are the three leaders, Bush and Fox and Martin, walking down the steps. And I later learned that actually that's about where they started. They never went up there. Everything is staged. Everything is staged. Everything is a lie. We are living a lie. But there you go. There he is, and the reporter there, visiting Mexican ruins, and President Reagan has done the same, but nothing about the SPP, other than their meeting down there, to forge better cooperation or whatever the nonsense was. Well, various conspirators also were plotting at the secret September 2006 North American Forum in Banff, Canada, under the joint chairmanship of George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State. There he is, along with a couple of guys from Mexico and Canada there. All three are former ministers. It's a shadow government, you see. I have 10 minutes, okay. And at this meeting, thanks to Judicial Watch, who had to file a Freedom of Information Act request in order to get these documents, here are some of the other traders who are participating in this meeting discussing the merger. Deborah Bolton, political advisor to commander at U.S. Northern Command. This reads like the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about in 1961 when he left office. Ron Kovas, president of the Americas Lockheed Martin Corporation. Ryan Henry, principal deputy under Secretary of Defense. Admiral Tim Keating, commander of U.S. Northern Command. Doris Meisner, senior fellow, Migration Policy Institute. She was the head of immigration under Bill Clinton. Mary O'Grady, editorial board member of the Wall Street Journal. General Peter Pace, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. U.S. Department of Defense, defending our nation, obviously. More names. Our buddy Robert Pastor, he's everywhere. Dr. William Perry, professor at Stanford and former Secretary of Defense. James Schlesinger, former Secretary of Energy and Defense and former director of the CIA. Clay Sell, Deputy Secretary of Energy. Major General Mark Volchev, U.S. Northern Command. James Woolsey, VP of Booz Allen Hamilton and former director of the CIA. They are all enemies of the United States of America. They are overthrowing the government and the U.S. Constitution. They are traitors. They need to be arrested and tried in U.S. courts of law for treason, in my opinion. And what did they discuss? Well, here are some direct quotes from some of the documents. Border crossing facilitation, economic integration, energy integration, standards and regulatory convergence. Here's an excerpt from one of the documents. We want to imagine a different North America, one in which the gap in income that separates Mexico from its northern neighbors has narrowed significantly. Now, this doesn't mean bring the Mexican people up to our level. It means bring the American middle class down to the level of a third world country. Goods and services traverse the border smoothly, and trucks do not have to offload their cargoes at the border. Well, we talked about that already, okay. New trade corridors have been built from northern Canada to southern Mexico. That's the NAFTA superhighway. And labor markets are increasingly integrated with free movement of labor. That means 50 million more Mexicans will be coming here very shortly, and probably millions of people from other countries. Well, on August 20th to 21st of this year, just a few weeks ago, Bush and Calderon and Harper met at the third annual SPP summit in Montebello, Canada. The summit was held behind closed doors at a heavily guarded chateau, and there they are shaking hands at the press conference. And a week before the meeting, 22 U.S. congressmen, 21 Republicans and 1 Democrat, urged President Bush in a letter not to continue moving ahead with the SPP. There are some patriots on Capitol Hill, and the Bush administration ignored them. Well, your speaker tonight, Dan Sheehy, was on August 20th, the first day they had the meeting. I was speaking at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. I was invited to speak there for 1 hour by the Virginia Coalition for Immigration Reform to talk about the invasion of our country and the North American Union. And not one member of the media attended. 25 concerned citizens, but not one member of the media. This was in the National Press Club building. It was in the building off Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and Capitol Hill. My publisher sent out a press release to the Washington area media. The sponsors of the event contacted a number of reporters and editors, and the event was publicized on the National Press Club's website. Not one member of the media. Instead, the media, such as the LA Times, reported that Bush, Harper, and Calderon dismissed conspiracy theories about the SPP and NAFTA superhighway. Conspiracy theories. Sure. I've just spent the past hour showing you these conspiracy theories.
No theories. It's a conspiracy.
The merger scheme also calls for a North American currency, possibly called the Amero, to replace the US dollar, the Canadian dollar, and the Mexican peso. And this follows in line with what's going on in Europe with the euro. And as we watch the Federal Reserve deliberately depreciate the US dollar, it's now in parity with the Canadian dollar. And as oil goes up to near $90 a barrel. Well, a dollar collapse set the stage for creating a North American currency. I'm sure I'm just, yeah, it's a conspiracy theory.
It is.
Okay. Amazingly, and I'm going to send a Christmas card to former Mexican President Fox, because last week in a series of interviews on softball TV shows like Larry King, Mr. Fox admitted that he and President Bush for the past several years have been creating a North American Union and a single currency. He admitted it. However, this was not reported by the news networks or by the newspapers. But, this is great news, folks, because these elitists are so arrogant that they're coming out now. And I think this is great news for us. And I think the JBS is going to do a lot to capitalize on these opportunities. Through the Bush administration, the global elite are creating a borderless continental superstate devoted to the lowest possible wages. The merger will allow a regional government of unelected bureaucrats and corporate internationalists to harmonize our laws and regulations with Mexico and Canada. And now you know why they haven't enforced our immigration laws, built the fence, why they threw Ramos and Campion in prison for 12 years, and so forth and so on. The ends justify the means, because this is more important than the thousands of Americans who are killed, raped, by illegal aliens in our country every year. The globalists are paving the way for the North American Union so it is achievable by the year 2010. Free trade agreements in this immigration invasion are part of a larger scheme to abolish American independence in favor of a North American Union, one region of a world government. That's why there's a European Union. The goal of the globalists is to create a world monopoly, just like the game Monopoly.
Yep.
J.P. Morgan, you know, the game Monopoly, the little figure, the guy with the hat and the mustache, that's J.P. Morgan, by the way. The goal of the globalists is to create a world monopoly with workers making slave wages. We're going to have a workers' paradise. And I want to show you, I think it's a great photo, again, that I cut out of the LA Times, May 1st of this year, when the illegals were having more marches. Not as big as last year, but May 1st, of course, is Communist Day, May Day, the beginning of the Illuminati, May 1st, 1776, by the way. This picture here was on the front page of the LA Times, and this sign here says, "There are no borders in the workers' struggle." These are all mothers, I assume illegal aliens, probably have maybe a 6th grade education, if that. But this says there are no borders in the workers' struggle, and what really struck me was there's an apostrophe after the word workers, which is correct. That is correct. And I am wondering how this lady figured that out. She had a good editor, John said. Good editor. Maybe the editor was Ford Foundation?
Maybe, yeah.
But there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, America is being erased before our very eyes. And now what I think is good news. What can we do? And that's always the question. What can we do? What can everyday Americans, we're everyday Americans, we don't seek to control people. What can we do to stop this treason and evil? The message throughout my book, Fighting Immigration Anarchy, American Patriots, Battle to Save the Nation, is that everyday Americans can achieve the extraordinary. On April 22nd of this year, at a rally across from the White House, which I attended and spoke at, there were about 500 American patriots from across the country who spent their own money to attend this rally. It was the beginning of Hold Their Feet to the Fire on Capitol Hill. You may have heard about it. And on June 28th of this year, Americans achieved the extraordinary with a miraculous defeat of the treacherous Bush-Kennedy amnesty bill. This was the greatest grassroots uprising in modern political history. And here are some of these traitors. The day that the bill was defeated, these are not happy campers. These guys were stunned, and they are not acting. And here are Homeland Security Chief Chertoff and Carlos Gutierrez of the Commerce Department. But some of these same senators came back in September of this year trying to pass the so-called DREAM Act, another amnesty. Again, Americans defeated it. However, these traitors said they're going to come back again, and again, and again. But many Americans, like these, are marched with down Broadway to LA City Hall. Remember, I mentioned that to you when all the Mexicans were on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Americans of different skin colors, because we come in different skin colors and races and ethnicities and religions. We march for border and immigration enforcement. I'm going to show you some more, hopefully, inspiring photos. Many Americans are now on offense, ladies and gentlemen. And we are going on offense because this is it. This is it. There is no practice America. If we lose it, we can't get it back. This is it, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it. And we're going to stop it, and we're going to prevail, in my opinion, no matter what it takes. I personally don't care what it takes. We're going to stop this. There was a rally at the Federal Building in downtown Los Angeles earlier this year Jim Gilchrist, founder of the Minutemen, Ted Hayes, David Hernandez, who's running for LA mayor, all American Patriots. American Patriots come in different skin colors. This was in support of Ramos and Campion to get them out of prison. Here's the same rally. You can see these signs held by these two ladies. Stand our ground. We won't back down. Grandmothers. This is in LA, taken just a couple of weeks ago. No amnesty ever. Young people realize that no borders equals no country.
Right.
Young people are with us, and we need more of them, and you are going to go out and recruit them. Okay? This is on the other side of the street, across from National City Hall. Remember I showed you that picture of the Reconquista. Here are the American Patriots, and back there somewhere. There are scores of us there with American flags, and you can see the positive expressions, ladies and gentlemen. If you ever get a chance, attend one of these pro-border rallies because it is exciting. Arizona, Georgia, and Oklahoma have passed tough state laws cracking down on illegal immigration. And the illegals are beginning to leave those states. 18 state legislatures have introduced resolutions calling on their federal representatives to halt work on the NEU, and you can thank the JBS for that. Idaho, Montana, and Oklahoma have passed their resolutions. At least 27 U.S. congressmen, including all 3 Republican congressmen running for president, Ron Paul, Tom Tancredo, and Duncan Hunter, who get the least amount of time in these so-called debates, I'm sure that's just a coincidence, have signed on as co-sponsors of House Concurrent Resolution 40, which demands that Congress and the President, not allow construction of the superhighway or enter into the North American Union. We need to demand the same. You need to demand the same from your congressman. Support House Concurrent Resolution 22, demanding withdrawal of NAFTA. The JBS is behind this strongly. We have to eliminate NAFTA. This is key to saving our country. Demand that our current U.S. immigration laws be enforced now. Demand an end to anchor baby citizenship now. As far as I'm concerned, the babies who are born to the legal alien mothers are also illegal aliens.
Yes.
Demand an end to these illegal sanctuary city policies. Demand that your local governments, like Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and dozens across the country, pass laws banning illegals from working or renting. If they don't have a place to live or jobs, they're going to return to their countries, and those that don't, we are going to send back.
Yes.
We must end chain migration, passed in that terrible 1965 Immigration Act. Question every elected official and candidate on the immigration invasion, the superhighways in the North American Union. Vote out those who refuse to take a pro-borders, pro-immigration law enforcement position, and elect fellow citizens who understand their primary responsibility is to the citizens of the United States. Tell others what is really going on. And this is where you come in, and this is the most important thing we can do, in my opinion, or one of the most important. Tell others what is really going on and encourage them to get involved in the fight. We must all become Paul Revere's and get on our horse and ride around town and tell them that the North American Union is coming. Read my book. I spent 2 years researching and writing this. I went through quite a bit of duress, as I told you, without pay. I love America. And I will do whatever it takes to get it back. My book reads like an exciting novel. It chronicles the courage, passion, struggle, and dedication of citizen activists like you fighting for our borders and sovereignty. My book is about you, essentially. It's the first book in the country to examine the Security and Prosperity Partnership and the merger in detail. is well researched. There are 25 pages of footnotes. My publisher said it was the best researched book he had ever seen.
Wow.
And I think this is an inspiration and playbook for Americans who love our nation and freedoms. And remember that Robert Welch quote at the start of my talk? I mean, 40 years ago that he wrote that. That's really quite remarkable. John Birch Society, which I've come to know over the past 4 years, and I've read many of their publications, I think is an outstanding organization. Nobody told me to say that. That's my own personal opinion. And I've met a number of JBS members over the past few years, and a few in the last 2 days, and I think they're great people. I think it's a great organization, and I think what makes them special is that they are very well organized. Now, there are a number of other good organizations in our country, like NumbersUSA.com, that's been fighting the immigration invasion, but the John Birch Society has documented over 50 years what has been going on. They are the leaders. They understand what is really going on here. We're getting really close to what may be the end of our country. And we need to recruit more people into this great organization, in my opinion. And finally, my last slide is a picture I took at a rally. It says, "Did they fight for open borders?" It's a picture of our troops raising the flag at Iwo Jima and illegals crossing our border illegally. And I want to read to you a letter I received from a man who heard me talk in Southern California some months ago and bought my book. I need to get my glasses out. An elderly man. He said, "Dear Dan, I haven't had the time to read your book thoroughly. What I have read I think is outstanding and should have been done a long time ago. I thank you with all of my heart for taking the time to write it. Sincerely, Art Beale, United States Navy, retired, a prisoner of war at Bataan and Corregidor in World War II. And he called me shortly thereafter, and he said he wanted to buy a box of my books to give to his friends. And I drove down to his house in Orange County, and he's about 90 years old, and he talked my ear off for an hour, telling me about his experiences in the South Pacific. And he said, "Dan, I wasn't a prisoner of war, so our politicians could give away our country to a Mexican invasion and a North American Union." Ladies and gentlemen, the patriotic resistance is growing across our country. But time is quickly running out. The globalists are working hard to end our freedom and our independence and our quality of life. They want their North American Union by the year 2010. Their objective is power and control. If our freedoms, independence, standard of living, and American way of life are to be preserved, it will be up to us. God bless you, and God bless America.
The United States of America. Born in 1776, our country is the offspring of a religious-based heritage of liberty under law. Blessed with great natural resources and a pioneer people given to industry and moral discipline, our nation grew to be strong and prosperous and developed the finest governmental system ever devised by man. America soon became known as the refuge of the world's tired, hungry, and poor. Millions left everything in the old world to start over in a land that rewarded initiative and hard work and perseverance. The many millions who didn't come here found comfort and hope in knowing that indeed there was such a bastion of freedom and opportunity, a place where dreams could become reality. Today, our nation appears wealthier and more powerful than ever. New technologies have revolutionized our daily lives. Luxuries once enjoyed only by the rich are commonplace and very affordable. Home ownership is widespread, and our people have the expectation of continued economic growth and prosperity. Yet more and more people are coming to realize that they may prosper materially only for a time because their freedoms are diminishing. The sobering reality is that America has been led far from its praiseworthy beginnings. Our people and businesses groan under a heavy burden of economic, political, and social problems, which are the result of a widespread departure from the fundamental truths that made our nation great. If the United States of America is to endure, citizens far and wide must once again come to understand, embrace, and live by timeless concepts called Americanism. What made America great and set it apart from other lands? Was it natural resources? No, other lands are equally blessed. Was it the people? No, the people who built America came from elsewhere. Was it government planning and wisdom that spurred our nation to such heights? No again. It wasn't what government did that made America great. It was what government was prevented from doing that made the difference. What set America apart from other lands was freedom for the individual. Freedom to work, to produce, to succeed, and especially to keep the fruits of one's labors. America became great precisely because the stifling effect of too much government had been prevented. However, freedom in America was not totally unrestrained. Americans overwhelmingly chose to limit their actions with moral codes such as the Ten Commandments, personal morality, and limited government. It's a combination that characterized America and made it the envy of the world. When our founding fathers decided they'd had enough of British oppression, they broke away and declared independence. They stated as self-evident truth in the Declaration of Independence that men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In other words, God gave man his rights, and that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in the very next sentence, the founders defined the proper role of government when they stated that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. This is the entire philosophical base of our nation. Here, the government cannot legitimately redistribute the wealth, assume power over the people's lives, and dominate man's existence with oppressive taxation, regulations, and controls. According to the founders, government was to be a negative force, which leaves people alone. Its sole function is to protect citizens from one another and from foreign governments, and especially from their own government itself. The founders did not create a government to be a positive force, to do things for people, to take from some, to give to others. They understood that when a government starts doing something for one citizen, it has to take from another to do so. And in the process, it gains control over both. Britain's rulers didn't accept the Declaration of Independence, so our forefathers had to fight a war to make it stick. By 1783, the War for Independence had been won, and British forces were sent back across the sea. But the governmental system at that time was weak. It had no power to settle disputes between the states, nor the power to tax for proper needs, such as national defense. So in 1787, delegates from 12 of the 13 states met in Philadelphia to revise the system, and they produced an entirely new governmental structure known as the Constitution of the United States. Keeping faith with the thunderous assertions in the Declaration, the Constitution was written to govern the government, not the people, and not the states, each of which was a jealous guardian of its own sovereignty. The founders created a central government with strictly limited powers. This left the states free to compete with one another to be the best state, the one with the least amount of taxation and controls, one where citizens would want to build a business and raise a family. That spirit of competition produced excellence, as honest competition always does. It's important to note that the Constitution wasn't forced on the people. It was sent back to the states for ratification, and several of the founding fathers wrote essays explaining it. in an effort to persuade fellow Americans to adopt this new system of government. Some of the essays written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay were collected into a volume known as the Federalist Papers. Those essays provide valuable insights into the intent of the founders in establishing our government. Eventually, all 13 states ratified the Constitution, and then each ratified the first 10 amendments known as the Bill of Rights, further tying the hands of the federal government. These amendments are indeed about rights, but it would have been better had the Bill of Rights been labeled the Bill of Limitations on Government. Why? Because it's vital to realize that the Bill of Rights never gave citizens any rights whatsoever. Its sole purpose was to safeguard God-given rights by limiting government power. The founders even insisted that Congress shall make no law about speech, religion, the press, assembly, the right to petition, the right to keep and bear arms, and so on. These amendments are directed squarely at the federal government, not the individual and not the states. They are like most of the 10 Commandments, which are essentially thou shalt nots. The Bill of Rights says Congress shall not, all the way up to the marvelous 10th Amendment, which says in effect, if we forgot anything, you can't do that either. When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having 0 power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these 5, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one,